What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Giant Travels by Van, where safety is the #1 priority. Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about insulating and skinning a wall in your van. But don't forget to enter in the comments if you think you know where the inspiration for today's intro came from. Let's get started. In my last video, I covered how I was skinning these wheel wells with the aluminum foil backed insulation they sell at Home Depot to use on ductwork. It gives you a little bit of sound deadening and just a tiny bit of insulation, but I'll be covering these with polyiso board for their primary insulation later on. I want to focus on the walls though. Here I didn't want to fill the wall completely with expanding foam as so many have done. So I wound up using 2-inch foam padding to just try and impede some of the airflow here. My insulation is going to be placed on the inside of the wall as polyiso board, pretty much trying to be contiguous on all the walls. So I wasn't so much concerned about insulating inside the wall, just rather slowing it down a little bit with some foam padding here, as you see. To get a pattern transferred of the wheel well onto the polyiso board, you can lay it down like this in front of it and transfer some measurements of width and length and height onto the polyiso board so that you can do a rough cutout and make it fit over the wheel well a little better. This photo is turned sideways since I know the internet will attack if you use portrait photographs on YouTube. But I'm just trying to show that how you can mark out the curvature of the door by holding it up against the opening as closely as you can and using a felt tip permanent marker to just transfer that curve onto the polyiso board. Then when I laid it down here, you can see it's cut out, but I backed up 1.5 inches or so back from that insulation so that it'll lie inside of it. I'm actually going to cut it even closer than this so I can put some wood trim around it. But this is a starting point to get the iso board cut. You can kind of see how the rough cut fits here. Again, I'm just trying to get around anything I need to in the van and get it ready for a much closer, tighter cut so that I can trim this out later. As I did with my flooring, you can also then use the polyiso board to trace that pattern onto the plywood skin that I'm using. I'm using 1/4 inch plywood here to just cover the wall. There were a few wires that I still needed to address bringing through the wall. So I wound up cutting a new hole up on the curvature towards the window, where there would be a window in the side of the van, and then used a piece of wire and pulled some of the wiring through. And then this was the result, that I got as clean a surface as I could to skin it and seal it with the wiring going where I needed it to, where everything will come together for a set of switches and power coming in from the solar panel. You can see I used some spray foam here in a few places inside the wall, and it led me to come up with a technique that might help others if you just want to use a partial can, because the product will harden after use and clog, and so you won't be able to spray the next day or a week later with the same can. What I did was buy some acetone, which is advertised on the can as how you can wash it off of your fingers or anything before it's set up and hardened. And I filled the lid high enough so that inverted I could set the can in it and it would keep the nozzle immersed in the acetone. I then cut the spray straw into 4 lengths so that I could use it 4 times and throw away each one of those little pieces. And then the nozzle attachment that you trigger it with was small enough to actually fit down inside the lid. So this puts the nozzle attachment and the top of the can submersed in acetone. And I found that several days later, I was still able to spray with this nozzle and can. So that might help others if you want to be able to use a partial can. Just be careful, acetone's not the best safe stuff to be handling. Make sure that you hold the yellow lid down very firmly when you try and pull the can off of it later to use it again. And carefully dispose of this properly per the can instructions. You don't see it here, but there's actually another layer of polyiso board that was carefully cut to fit just in the original window that was visible earlier. And so what I'm simply doing is trying to layer it up using a few scraps I had and trying to build up the surface to where it should be about parallel with the skin of plywood that I'm going to put over the top of it. So here I've used some of the expanding foam, as others have used, to kind of tie this all together and tie it down to the wall. It does work very well. You have to spray it kind of carefully and try and force it to make good contact with the polyiso board, but it does solidify everything and hold it in place really well. Here you can see that I've called out all of the attachment points in blue, and then all of the attachment points that I'm going to use for my cabinetry in black circles here. So that'll be in an upcoming video as I show how I'm building cabinets and attaching them to this wall. 1/4-inch plywood will tear out pretty badly when you drill a hole through it. So here's a technique you can use. Take a scrap of wood and a clamp it to the wood on the other side of where you're drilling, and you'll get a nice clean hole then on the front of the plywood. Here's a test fit where I'm just seeing how it all lays up when the 1/4-inch skin is fastened down to the wall. Since I'm using rib nuts for all my attachments to the van, one of the things that's important to use is a thread locker, so that when you do your final bolting of all these brackets and attachments to the van, that they won't work loose over time driving the van around with the vibration. So pick up some thread locker. It's inexpensive, and the blue kind will let it be taken loose with some effort, but it won't vibrate loose on you while you're driving around. Since my goal was to create as much of a contiguous vapor barrier as I could, here I've pulled one of the pieces of plywood flooring up so that I can use the aluminum foil tape to join all of this polyiso board together and try and create that vapor barrier. One of the downsides of working with the aluminum foil tape so much is that it will gum up your scissors over time, so it may be handy to keep some type of scraper to take the heavy residue off, and then a product like Goo Gone and a rag to clean the gluey residue off the scissors and restore them back to working nicely. Here you can see I've cut and fit some of the sticky backed insulation that I used on the wheel wells to close off and finish off the top area here. That, in conjunction with some of the aluminum foil tape, will let you create a nice contiguous area that will block moisture from getting to the van. I've done that as much as possible where there's penetrations for brackets for the cabinetry that'll be attached in the van, and as well around the doorway I've used tape to bring the polyiso board down to the middle of the van so that you don't simply have moisture going behind the polyiso board and getting to the skin of the van. Lastly, with the skin installed, you can see here at the back door there's some exposure of the insulation, but my plan is to carry this insulation as much as possible around the curvature towards the back door, and the flat area put some trim boards on below the handle that I've installed to get in and out of the van easily. As well, at the top of the area, I'm not concerned about the foil showing here, since this will be inside of some cabinets that are installed here to store things, so I don't really care what the appearance is inside of there. Lastly, up by the side door, you can see that I've left enough room for some wood trim, and I have an idea of how I'm going to do the trim by using the skin as a pattern to create some trim boards that then I'll use the rib nuts to attach and trim this area out nice to match the curvature of the insulation at the door. Overall, I was satisfied with it, and it'll get me ready to install my cabinets, which I'll be doing soon. All right, thanks for watching. I hope you learned something if you decide to insulate or skin the inside of your van. If you're wondering about the inspiration for today's intro, that comes from a channel called Crazy Russian Hacker, where he tests lots of products, whether for camping or housewares, and he has a large following. I'll put a link in the description below in case you want to watch any of the videos. Stay tuned, we've got a lot more van building to do. In the next episode, I'll be building my inside cabinets. See you soon. Don't forget to enter in the comments if you think you know, If you're wondering about the inspiration for today's video intro, the intro to the video. All right, thanks for watching today. I hope you learned something valuable. If you want to insulate or put a skin on the inside of your van, that sounds... For those of you still wondering about anything, really, anything.